Hey there, travelers. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. Now let's begin our journey into the unknown. The first thing that hit me wasn't the cold, it was the sound. A mechanical hissing that cut through my skull like a rusty blade, followed by the sharp crack of ice splitting away from metal. My lungs burned as they dragged in air that tasted of copper and antiseptic, each breath feeling like swallowing broken glass. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, every muscle screaming in protest as feelings slowly crept back into my limbs. The world spun behind my eyelids, a nauseating carousel of confusion and pain. "Randy! Randy! Can you hear me?" The voice sounded distant, muffled, like someone calling from the bottom of a well. I forced my eyes open and immediately regretted it. Harsh fluorescent lights stabbed into my retinas, turning everything into a white-hot blur. I tried to speak, but only managed a strangled groan. "Easy there, Sergeant. Don't try to move too fast." As my vision cleared, I saw a face hovering over me. Southeast Asian features, short black hair plastered to her skull with moisture. Putra. Corporal Leah Putra, my demolitions expert. But something was wrong with her eyes. They held a haunted quality I'd never seen before, like she'd already witnessed something that broke a part of her. I was lying in what looked like a medical pod, its metallic walls still slick with condensation. Steam rose from my skin as the temperature differential hit me, and I realized I was wearing nothing but a thin hospital gown. Around me, 3 other identical pods sat open like mechanical flowers, their occupants slowly stirring to life. "What happened?" My voice came out as a rasp, throat raw and unfamiliar. Putra's face tightened. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Balthazar's been awake for about 20 minutes, Diana for 10. You were the last one up." I struggled to sit up, muscles protesting every movement. The room we were in wasn't the Antarctic research station I remembered. This was different, sleeker, more advanced. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with data I couldn't comprehend. Everything had a sterile, abandoned feeling, like a museum after closing time. "Where are we?" I managed to ask, swinging my legs over the edge of the pod. The floor was cold against my bare feet, sending shivers up my spine. "That's the million-dollar question, Sarge." Balthazar Rico's voice cracked as he spoke. Our communications specialist looked even younger than his 22 years, his sandy hair sticking up at odd angles. "According to the computer systems, we're in New York. Manhattan, to be specific. About 40 stories underground." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. We were in Antarctica. The research station, the outbreak, was 30 years ago." The voice belonged to Diana Gooding, our medic. She stood near a bank of monitors, her dark skin pale with shock. In her hands, she held what looked like a medical chart, her fingers trembling as she read from it. 30 years? I repeated, certain I'd misheard. Diana nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "The date on these systems. It's December 15th, 2054. The last thing I remember was December 3rd, 2024. We've been frozen, Randy, in cryogenic stasis for 3 decades. The room tilted around me. 30 years. 3 decades of my life, gone. Everyone I'd known, everyone I'd cared about. They'd either grown old or died while I slept like the dead in a metal tomb. "The mission," I said, fragments of memory starting to surface. "Dr. Yates, the research team, the thing they found under the ice." Putra's expression darkened. "You remember the parasite?" How could I forget? The grotesque organism they'd unearthed from the Antarctic ice, something that looked like it belonged in a nightmare rather than on Earth. We'd been sent to evacuate the research station after reports of Dr. Will Yates attacking his colleagues. What we'd found instead was a horror show. Scientists transformed into twisted mockeries of human life, their bodies hosting something alien and hungry. "The containment breach," I continued, the memories flooding back. "The cryo system activated. We were trying to get to the extraction point when the whole damn facility flooded with coolant," Balthazar finished. Last thing I remember was the temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath crystallizing in the air. I stood on unsteady legs, the room spinning slightly as blood flow adjusted. We need to get out of here, find out what happened. There has to be someone. Randy. Diana's voice stopped me cold. She was staring at one of the monitors, her face drained of all color. You need to see this. I stumbled over to where she stood, the others gathering around us. The screen showed what appeared to be security footage from street level. Manhattan from the perspective of someone looking up from underground. But this wasn't the Manhattan I knew. The buildings were broken things, skeletal remains reaching toward a gray sky like the bones of some massive graveyard. Snow fell in thick sheets, coating everything in a blanket of white that seemed to muffle even the silence. No cars moved on the streets. No people walked the sidewalks. Nothing lived in that frozen wasteland above our heads. The entire city, Diana whispered. It's dead. Everything's dead. We stood there in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what we were seeing. The world we'd known was gone, replaced by this frozen tomb. Whatever had happened in the 30 years we'd been sleeping, it had ended everything. That's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere above us, transmitted through the building's structure. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but gradually resolved into something more specific. More terrifying. Scratching. Clawing. Something massive moving through the floors above us, its talons scraping against concrete and steel. Tell me that's just the building settling, Balthazar whispered. But we all knew better. The sound grew closer, accompanied now by a wet, sliding noise that made my skin crawl. Whatever was up there, it was big, and it was coming down. We need weapons, I said, my military training kicking in despite the surreal situation. Equipment, anything. Putra was already moving toward a series of lockers along the far wall. Found our gear, she called out, relief evident in her voice. Looks like whoever brought us here wanted us to be ready for something. Our weapons and equipment were exactly as we'd left them. M4 carbines, sidearms, tactical gear, even our winter combat uniforms. As I pulled on my familiar gear, muscle memory took over, providing a comforting routine in the midst of chaos. The scratching sound was directly overhead now, accompanied by a new noise that made my blood freeze. A wet, organic sound like raw meat being torn apart, and underneath it all, something that might have been breathing. If breathing could sound like wind whistling through a charnel house. Movement on the security feeds, Diana reported, her voice tight with controlled fear. Something's in the stairwell. Multiple somethings. I shouldered my rifle and moved to the monitor she was watching. The black and white security feed showed the stairwell 2 floors above us, and what I saw there defied rational explanation. They moved like men, but wrong. Joints bending in impossible directions, limbs elongated beyond human proportions. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and seemed to ripple and shift as if something was moving beneath it. But it was their faces that made my breath catch in my throat. Where human features should have been, there were instead gaping maws filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. Writhing appendages emerged from these openings, green and glistening, moving with their own alien intelligence. What the hell are those things? Balthazar breathed. I'd seen them before, or something like them, in the research station in Antarctica. But these were different, evolved, more complex. The parasite had had 30 years to perfect its craft. They're what's left, I said grimly, checking my weapon. The parasite found new hosts. It's been learning. The creatures had reached our floor. Through the reinforced door, we could hear them moving in the corridor outside. That wet sliding sound punctuated by occasional scrapes of claw against metal. There's got to be another way out, Putra said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Emergency exits, service tunnels, something. Diana was already scanning the room's schematics on another terminal. There, she said, pointing to a section of the far wall. Maintenance shaft. It leads to the building's central air system. The door to our room shuddered as something heavy struck it from the outside. The reinforced metal held, but I could see it beginning to buckle. Move, I ordered. Putra, get that shaft open. Balthazar, help Diana with the equipment we can carry. We're leaving everything else. As Putra worked on the maintenance panel, I kept my rifle trained on the door. The impacts were coming faster now, accompanied by a sound that chilled me to the bone. Something that might have been voices, if voices could be made of wet tissue and broken glass. "Got it," Putra announced as the panel slid open, revealing a narrow shaft disappearing into darkness. The door exploded inward just as Diana disappeared into the shaft. Pieces of twisted metal flew across the room, and through the opening came our first clear look at what we were dealing with. The creature that emerged stood nearly 7 feet tall, its elongated form barely fitting through the doorway. What had once been human was now something else entirely. Pale flesh stretched over an impossible frame, with those horrific feeding appendages writhing from what used to be a face. When it looked at us, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I opened fire, my carbine chattering in the confined space. The bullet struck center mass, but instead of dropping, the thing simply staggered backward. Dark fluid leaked from the wounds, but they began closing almost immediately. "They're regenerating," I shouted over the gunfire. "Go! Go! Go!" Putra dove into the shaft as more creatures poured through the destroyed doorway. I laid down covering fire as Balthazar scrambled after her, then followed myself, pulling the maintenance panel closed behind us, just as claws scraped against the metal. The shaft was barely wide enough for a man, forcing us to crawl single file through the darkness. Behind us, I could hear the creatures tearing at the panel, their alien vocalizations echoing through the confined space. "Where does this lead?" I called ahead to Diana. "Building services level," she called back. "From there we can reach the surface access. The surface, where whatever had happened to the world waited for us. But staying here meant facing those things in a confined space where our weapons were useless." As we crawled through the darkness toward an uncertain fate, one thought kept echoing in my mind. We'd been frozen for 30 years, preserved while the world died around us. The question was, had we been saved, or just delayed for execution? The emergency exit led us into a narrow alleyway between 2 towering apartment buildings. Snow fell steadily, muffling our footsteps as we emerged from the underground facility. December in New York had always been cold, but this felt different somehow. Heavier, more oppressive, as if the very air carried the weight of abandonment. "Jesus Christ," Balthazar whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The city stretched before us like a graveyard of giants. Windows were shattered in buildings that still stood, their jagged edges catching what little light filtered through the overcast sky. Abandoned cars lined the streets. Some crashed into storefronts. Others simply left where their owners had fled. Rust and decay marked everything, 30 years of neglect taking its toll on the concrete jungle. But it wasn't the destruction that made my stomach clench. It was the silence. No sirens, no traffic, no voices calling from windows or footsteps echoing off pavement. Even the rats seemed to have abandoned this place. The only sound was the soft whisper of snow falling on metal and stone, creating a blanket of white that almost looked peaceful if you didn't know what lay beneath. "Where is everyone?" Diana asked, adjusting her pack as she scanned the empty streets. I checked my compass, trying to get our bearings. "First priority is intel. We need to understand what happened here. Putra, you see any signs of recent activity?" Our demolitions expert crouched near an overturned hot dog cart, examining the snow patterns around it. "Nothing fresh. This snow's been accumulating for hours, maybe days. No footprints, no disturbances." We moved carefully through the streets, weapons ready but finding nothing to aim at. Every storefront we passed told the same story. Hastily abandoned, doors left open, merchandise scattered across floors as if people had simply dropped everything and run. But run from what? And where had they gone? "Sarge," Balthazar called from beside a newsstand. "You need to see this." The newspaper headlines were dated March 2025, just 3 months after our mission in Antarctica. The main story made my blood run cold. Unknown pathogen spreads through major cities. Military declares martial law. Below that, in smaller print, CDC confirms parasitic organism. Avoid contact with infected. March 2025, I read aloud. 3 months after we were frozen. Diana picked up another paper, this one dated April 2025. Safe zones established. Evacuation orders for New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. It spread fast, Putra observed grimly. Faster than anyone could have predicted. We continued our search through the abandoned streets, collecting pieces of the puzzle. The progression was clear from the newspaper dates. What had started as isolated incidents in March had become a full-scale evacuation by April. By May 2025, according to the last dated newspaper we found, the military had stopped trying to contain the outbreak and focused entirely on protecting what they called primary safe zones. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and we needed shelter. A 20-story office building caught my attention. Its lobby doors were intact, and there were no obvious signs of damage to the lower floors. That one, I decided, pointing toward the building. We'll set up there for the night, figure out our next move. The lobby was a tomb of marble and dust, corporate artwork still hanging crooked on the walls. Our footsteps echoed as we made our way to the stairwell, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Third floor should work, I suggested. High enough to spot trouble, low enough for a quick exit. But as we climbed the stairs, Putra suddenly raised her hand, motioning for us to stop. You hear that? I strained my ears and caught it. A wet, sliding sound coming from somewhere above us. Then another, and another, like multiple heavy objects being dragged across carpeted floors. They're here, Diana whispered, her voice tight with fear. The sounds were getting closer, accompanied now by a low, guttural breathing that seemed to come from multiple sources. Through the stairwell's emergency lighting, I could see movement on the landing above us, pale shapes shifting in the shadows. Back to the lobby, I ordered quietly. Slow and steady. But we were too late. The first creature appeared at the top of the stairs, and I got my first clear look at what the parasite had created. It had once been human. I could tell by the general shape and the tattered remains of clothing. But now, it was something else entirely. Its skin was pale and loose, hanging in folds that rippled with each movement. Where its face should have been was a gaping maw filled with writhing green appendages that seemed to taste the air. It wasn't alone. More shapes crowded behind it, their movements jerky and uncoordinated but driven by an unmistakable hunger. "Contact!" I shouted, opening fire as the creature lunged down the stairs toward us. My bullet struck center mass, dark fluid spraying from the wounds, but the thing barely slowed. The rounds that should have dropped a human simply punched through its altered flesh without stopping its advance. "They're not going down!" Putra yelled, her carbine chattering as more creatures poured into the stairwell. We fought our way back to the lobby, but the sounds of gunfire had attracted attention from elsewhere in the building. The elevators opened with mechanical precision, revealing more of the pale horrors. They moved with the shambling gait of things that no longer understood balance or coordination. But there were so many of them. "Outside!" I commanded. But even as we burst through the lobby doors, I could see more shapes moving in the building across the street. Our gunfire had awakened something that had been dormant, and now it was spreading through the abandoned structures like a plague. "This way!" came a voice from our left. I spun toward the sound and saw her, a woman with long blonde hair emerging from behind an overturned delivery truck, an M4 rifle in her hands. She was wearing tactical gear that had seen better days, the fabric worn and patched in multiple places, but her movements were confident and professional. She was also, I couldn't help but notice even in our desperate situation, strikingly attractive. Something about her features and the way she carried herself spoke of both strength and vulnerability. "Move!" she shouted, laying down covering fire as creatures began spilling out of multiple buildings around us. "They're waking up the whole district!" We followed her through a maze of abandoned vehicles and debris, her knowledge of the area evident in every turn she took. Behind us, I could hear the wet sounds of dozens, maybe hundreds of creatures emerging from their hiding places, drawn by the noise and scent of living prey. She led us to what looked like a maintenance entrance to the subway system, producing a key from her tactical vest. "Down here," she said, ushering us into a tunnel that smelled of rust and stagnant water. "Who are you?" I asked as we descended into the darkness. "Emma Hawthorne," she replied, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Former Army Rangers, 75th Regiment. Been down here about 6 years now." The tunnel led to what had once been a subway maintenance facility, but it had been transformed into something resembling a military bunker. Electric lights powered by generators illuminated workstations, sleeping areas, and what appeared to be a sophisticated communications setup. "Welcome to what's left of the resistance," Emma said, securing the entrance behind us. 3 other people emerged from the shadows, all armed, all wearing the same type of worn tactical gear. They looked like soldiers who had been fighting a losing war for far too long. "Randy Roman," I introduced myself. "These are my team members, Putra, Balthazar, and Diana. We've been out of communication for a while." Emma studied us with intelligent gray eyes. "How long is a while?" 30 years, Diana answered bluntly. The silence that followed was profound. Emma's expression shifted through disbelief, understanding, and finally a kind of grim acceptance. "Cryogenic preservation," she said finally. "We'd heard rumors about military experiments, but we never confirmed them." She gestured for us to sit around a makeshift table. "You picked one hell of a time to wake up." "What happened out there?" I asked. "How did it get so bad?" Emma poured steaming coffee from a thermos, the warmth a welcome relief after our encounter with the creatures. "The parasites spread faster than anyone anticipated. They adapted, evolved. What you saw up there? That's them in their dormant state." "Dormant?" Balthazar asked. "The cold slows them down," Emma explained. "Winter is the only time of year we can move around at all, and even then it's dangerous. Come spring, when the temperature rises above 40 degrees, she shrugged, they become active hunters, fast, coordinated, relentless. That's when they really spread." "So the cold is the only thing keeping them from overrunning everything," Putra observed. "Exactly. It's the only reason humanity hasn't been completely wiped out. We have maybe 4 months of semi-safety each year, and we use every day of it to scavenge supplies and prepare for the warm months when we have to go deep underground." Diana leaned forward. "You said something about a resistance. How many survivors are there?" "Worldwide? Maybe a few thousand scattered across the northern regions. Here in the city, we're down to about 40 people spread across 3 different facilities." Emma's expression darkened. "Every year we lose more." "But you're working on something," I said, noting the sophisticated equipment around us. "This isn't just a survival bunker." Emma exchanged glances with her companions, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. "Before the outbreak reached critical mass, before the government collapsed completely, there was a classified military project, something called Operation Frosthammer." She stood and led us to a computer terminal displaying what looked like satellite imagery. A weather manipulation satellite, designed to create localized ice storms and blizzards. "Weather control?" Balthazar said skeptically. "The technology existed," Emma confirmed. "They were developing it as a strategic weapon. Imagine being able to freeze enemy forces in place or create impassable storms around key targets. But the outbreak happened before they could deploy it." I studied the satellite schematics on the screen. "And you have access to this?" 3 years ago, we made contact with Dr. Patricia Wells, one of the original project scientists. She'd been hiding in a NORAD facility in Colorado. Before she died, she gave us the access codes and operational parameters." Emma's voice carried a note of excitement I hadn't heard since we'd awakened. "We've been working to establish satellite control ever since." "You want to make the whole planet cold," Diana said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Not permanently," Emma clarified. "But if we can trigger a sustained cold front, lower global temperatures by even 10 degrees for a few years, it might give us the time we need to develop a real solution. Maybe find a way to kill these things permanently." Putra was studying the technical readouts. "This level of weather manipulation, the power requirements alone." "The satellite uses a nuclear power source," one of Emma's companions spoke up for the first time. "It's got enough juice for maybe 3, possibly 4 major weather events before the reactor burns out. So you get 3 shots," I said. Emma nodded grimly. "Which is why we've been preparing for almost 2 years. Running calculations, planning target zones, making sure we don't waste the opportunity." She turned to face us directly. "We're ready to run the first test." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night. We're going to target a 50-mile radius around Boston. It's far enough away that we won't affect our operations here, but close enough that we can monitor the results." I looked at my team, seeing the same mixture of hope and skepticism in their eyes that I felt. After 30 years of humanity losing this war, the idea that we might have a weapon capable of changing the tide seemed almost too good to believe. "What do you need from us?" I asked. Emma smiled for the first time since we'd met her, and I was struck again by how beautiful she was, even in this underground bunker surrounded by the remnants of civilization. "4 more soldiers with actual military training," she said. "Because if this test works, we're going to need all the help we can get to coordinate the real assault." Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of creatures moving through the snow-covered streets above us, hunting for the prey that had escaped them. But for the first time since awakening into this nightmare, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again: hope. Tomorrow, we would find out if humanity still had a chance to reclaim its world. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Kate's team had converted an entire section of the subway maintenance facility into a command center, with banks of computers displaying weather patterns, satellite trajectories, and target coordinates for what they were calling Test Event Alpha. I found myself working closely with Kate as she walked us through the operational parameters. Her knowledge of the weather manipulation system was impressive, but what struck me more was the way she moved with quiet confidence through the technical details. Every gesture, every explanation carried the weight of someone who'd spent years preparing for this moment. "The satellite will be in optimal position over Boston at 23:47 hours, she explained, pointing to the trajectory display. "We'll have a 12-minute window to initiate the sequence before it moves out of range." Diana studied the meteorological data with professional interest. "The atmospheric conditions look favorable. Low pressure system already moving in from the northwest." "That's intentional," Kate confirmed. "We've been tracking weather patterns for months, waiting for the right opportunity. The existing storm front will amplify the satellite's effect, creating a feedback loop that should sustain the temperature drop for at least 72 hours. Balthazar looked up from the communications array he'd been examining. "This hardware is incredible. How did you maintain satellite contact for 3 years?" "Wasn't easy," replied Marcus Webb, one of Kate's team members. "Half the time we're working with jury-rigged equipment and hoping the orbital relays don't fail." As evening approached, the tension in the command center became palpable. Everyone knew they were about to attempt something that could either represent humanity's first real victory against the Parasites or waste 1/3 of their only weapon. "Randy," Kate said quietly, approaching me as I checked my equipment. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" We stepped away from the others, finding a quiet corner near the sleeping quarters. In the dim lighting, her features seemed softer, more vulnerable than the hardened soldier I'd first met. "I need you to know something," she began, her gray eyes meeting mine directly. "If this doesn't work, if the test fails—" "It won't fail," I interrupted, but she shook her head. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the weapon." She glanced back toward the command center where her team was making final preparations. "These people have been living on hope for years. The idea that we might actually have a way to fight back is the only thing keeping them going." I saw the weight she carried then, not just as a military leader, but as someone responsible for maintaining hope in a hopeless world. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if this test proves the satellite doesn't work, we'll lose more than just a weapon. We'll lose the will to keep fighting." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And I don't know if I can watch that happen." I reached out instinctively, my hand covering hers. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, warmth in a world that had grown impossibly cold. "Then we make sure it works," I said firmly. A small smile crossed her lips. "Just like that?" "Just like that." The moment stretched between us, charged with something that had nothing to do with the mission. Then Putra's voice cut through the silence. "Sarge, we're getting some unusual readings from the surface monitors." We hurried back to the command center where Diana was studying a bank of security feeds. "Movement patterns are changing," she reported. "The creature's topside. They're becoming more active." I studied the grainy black and white images, where before the parasites had moved with the slow, shambling gait we'd observed. Now they seemed more purposeful, more coordinated. "Temperature's been dropping all day," Webb observed, checking the meteorological data. "Should be making them more sluggish, not less." Unless something else is driving them, Kate said grimly. As if summoned by her words, a new sound echoed through the tunnel system, a low, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. It was unlike anything I'd heard from the individual creatures, deeper and more complex. What the hell was that? Balthazar asked, his face pale. Before anyone could answer, the sound came again, closer this time, and from multiple directions. They're coordinating, Diana realized with growing horror. Something's organizing them. Kate was already moving toward the weapons locker. All teams to defensive positions. This is not a drill. The next few minutes were chaos, as everyone scrambled to secure the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and the sound of weapons being chambered echoed through the confined space. How much time until the satellite window? I asked, checking my rifle. 47 minutes, Webb replied, his voice tight with stress. Another of those resonant calls echoed through the tunnels, and this time we could hear movement responding to it. The wet, sliding sounds of dozens, maybe hundreds of creatures moving through the subway system toward our position. They know we're here, Kate said, studying the security feeds. Something's drawing them directly to us. The generators, Putra realized suddenly. The heat signature, the electromagnetic emissions from all this equipment. We've been broadcasting our location like a beacon. I felt my stomach drop. How long have they been tracking us? Could be hours, Kate admitted. Maybe days. They're patient when they need to be. The first impacts came against the sealed entrance we'd used the night before. Heavy, rhythmic blows that sent vibrations through the entire facility. But these weren't the uncoordinated attacks we'd witnessed before. These were systematic, testing the defenses. Secondary entrances? I asked. 3 others, Kate confirmed. All sealed, but if they're organizing like this... She didn't need to finish. If the creatures had developed enough intelligence to coordinate their attacks, our defensive positions were compromised. We need to launch now, Webb said urgently, before they breach our perimeter. The satellite won't be in position for another 40 minutes, Diana protested. Then we make it work from a suboptimal position, Kate decided. Better to try with reduced effectiveness than not try at all. As if the creatures had heard our discussion, the impacts suddenly intensified. Multiple entrances were being attacked simultaneously, and I could hear the metal barriers beginning to buckle under the assault. 30 seconds to satellite contact, Webb announced, his fingers flying over the control interface. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in that hellish red glow, but the damage was done. The primary computer systems flickered and died, taking the satellite communications array with them. They cut the main power line, Marcus reported grimly. Must have found the external connections. Backup systems? I asked. Limited duration, Kate said. Maybe 20 minutes of full power, then we're down to basic life support. The sound of rending metal echoed through the facility. They were through the first barrier. Webb, status on the satellite link? Trying to re-establish contact on emergency power, he called back, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. The signal's weak, but I might be able to punch through. I could hear them in the tunnels now. Not just the wet sliding sounds, but something else. Vocalizations that almost sounded like communication. Whatever intelligence was coordinating them had evolved far beyond what we'd encountered in the research station 30 years ago. Contact established, Webb shouted triumphantly. Satellites responding, but we're still outside the optimal window. How suboptimal? Kate demanded. Effectiveness reduced by approximately 60%. The storm might not sustain itself. Another barrier gave way, closer this time. Through the security monitors, I caught glimpses of the creatures pouring through the breach. But these weren't the shambling horrors we'd fought in the office building. These moved with purpose, almost military precision. Do it, Kate ordered. Launch the test. Initiating weather modification sequence, Webb announced. Ionospheric heating in 3, 2, 1, mark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every screen in the facility flickered, displaying the satellite's view of the target zone. We watched as clouds began to swirl in patterns that defied natural weather formation, growing darker and more violent with each passing second. It's working, Diana breathed. But our celebration was cut short as the final barrier exploded inward. Through the smoking breach came something that made my blood freeze. It had once been human, I could tell by the general shape, but it had evolved far beyond the creatures we'd encountered before. This thing stood nearly 8 feet tall, its pale flesh rippling with unnatural muscle, and those writhing green appendages emerging from its face moved with obvious intelligence. Behind it came dozens more, all moving with the same coordinated purpose. "Fall back to the secondary chamber," Kate shouted, laying down covering fire as we retreated deeper into the facility. We fought a running battle through the narrow tunnels, our muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness as we tried to slow the advancing horde. But there were too many of them, and they were learning from each exchange, adapting their tactics in real time. "The satellite link," I called to Webb as we reached the final defensive position. "Still transmitting," he replied, hunched over a portable communications unit. "The storm's building, but slowly. We need more time." Time we didn't have. The creatures had surrounded our final position, and I could see intelligence in their movements as they probed our defenses. They were testing us, learning our patterns. That's when I realized the truth that had been staring us in the face. "They're not just coordinated," I told Kate as we crouched behind a makeshift barricade. "They're connected, some kind of hive mind." "What does that mean?" "It means everything they learn. They all learn. Every adaptation, every tactical evolution gets shared across the entire network." I looked at the satellite display showing the growing storm over Boston. "And if they figure out what we're doing here, they'll know how to stop it," she finished. The creatures pressed their attack with renewed intensity, as if they understood the urgency of preventing our weapon from reaching full effectiveness. But something was changing in the satellite feed. The storm was growing beyond the parameters we'd programmed, feeding on itself in a cascade effect that none of us had anticipated. "The temperature's dropping faster than projected," Webb reported with amazement. "The feedback loop is self-sustaining. Even if we lose satellite control now, the storm will continue." Through the chaos of battle, I heard something that made my heart skip. The sound of creatures retreating. Not just a few, but all of them, pulling back from our position as if responding to some unheard command. "They're leaving," Balthazar said in disbelief. "No," Kate corrected, studying the security feeds. "They're repositioning. Look at the surface monitors." On the screens, we could see creatures throughout the city moving in a coordinated exodus, flowing away from the urban center toward somewhere, all of them moving with the same purposeful direction. "Where are they going?" Diana asked. The answer came from Webb, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "The storm's spreading. Look at the weather tracking data." The satellite imagery showed something incredible and terrifying. The artificial storm over Boston hadn't just sustained itself, it was growing exponentially, spawning secondary weather formations that stretched hundreds of miles in every direction. "It's not stopping," I realized. "The cascade effect, it's triggering natural weather patterns, creating a continental-scale cooling event." "The creatures know," Kate said quietly. "They're fleeing south, trying to get ahead of the temperature drop." We watched in fascination as the storm system continued to expand, carrying the promise of the first winter that might actually give humanity a real advantage. But even as hope bloomed in my chest, I understood the implications. "This isn't a temporary solution," I told Kate. "We may have just triggered a new ice age." She looked at me with those gray eyes that had captured my attention from the first moment I'd seen her. "Is that a bad thing?" I thought about the empty cities above us, the billions of people lost to the parasite plague, the 30 years of humanity hiding in cold places and waiting to die. "No," I said finally. "I don't think it is." The satellite feed showed the storm reaching the edge of the continental United States and still growing. In a few days, maybe weeks, temperatures across most of North America would drop below the threshold where the parasites could remain active. For the first time in 3 decades, winter wouldn't be humanity's temporary refuge. It would be our weapon. As I watched Kate coordinate with her team to begin planning their next moves, I realized that waking up in this frozen world might not have been the end of our story after all. It might have been the beginning of humanity's chance to reclaim what we'd lost. And maybe, in this new ice age we'd created, there was room for something else I hadn't expected to find again. A future worth fighting for.